Pixel, and welcome back. Growing up as a young artist, even before I went to school, I remember the lengths at which I went to get access to information. Getting advice from fellow professionals was very, very challenging unless I was lucky enough to go to some art conference, which was very rare. They're much more common nowadays. And that depended on the type of art that I was interested in learning more about. More often than not, it was usually more about fine arts, things like that. So getting access to people and feedback was very, very challenging, if non-existent, especially for a young artist. Getting access to learning material, tutorials, lessons, schools was again very limited. If I wanted to, at least compared to today at least, but if I wanted to pick up something on my own, I would first of all need to learn about this thing, that this actual thing existed, this genre of art, this style. And then I would go to a library or a bookstore and I'd try to find some material on it, because there weren't any video tutorials or YouTube back in the 1980s and 90s. And at least not to the degree that it is today by any stretch. And so online learning was not available. And I remember even on some occasions having to go through amazing hoops and going on adventures trying to access a book or a magazine or something like that possessed information that I craved as an artist to learn. And I remember one such story, the biggest one of which being tracking down the book Drawing for Animation by Preston Blair. I'll never forget it. I had heard through the grapevine that this was a very sought after book, and it was a very popular one, and it had a lot of great information, particularly for people who wanted to study animation. And this is on top of the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams, which was and continues to be kind of the Bible for anybody studying animation. And I went at first to a bookstore downtown near where I worked or wherever I was hanging out. And I went to one bookstore after another, walking up and down St. Catherine Street. If you're from Montreal or if you've ever been around Montreal, you'll be familiar with St. Catherine Street as being kind of the main street that runs through downtown and right across Montreal pretty much. But nothing. One bookstore after another. I'd ask them and nothing. I went to libraries. I went to the local library. I went to libraries downtown. Could not find anything. We're talking weeks have passed at this point and I can't get my hands on it. In fact, nobody had even heard of it. To go even further, I ended up going to Toronto, not for the book specifically, but I went on a trip to Toronto and with my family, and they have a huge bookstore. I think it's called the Big Bookstore or something. If you're from Toronto, let me know. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a huge bookstore. I went in, I asked reception, do you have the book Drawing for Animation by Preston Blair? And they said maybe. And they looked through the catalog. They couldn't find it. I try another bookstore. I'm traveling all around Toronto trying to find something. Nobody's got the damn book. In fact, nobody's even heard of it. So I'm thinking to myself at this point, I'm running out of luck. So I leave Toronto, unsuccessful, and I come back home. And I just so happened, on my way back home, I needed to pick up some drawing pencils and a sketchbook. So I went to my local little art shop, art supplies shop right near where I used to live, named Gemst, and it's not around anymore, unfortunately. It was a little art store in NDG Montreal, and I walk in and I pick up some pencils and some paper and all that kind of stuff, and then I browse through the little bookshelf. They have this little bookshelf, and I look down at the bottom of the bookshelf, and lo and behold, there it is. Drawing for Animation by Preston Blair. And when I looked at it, I laughed to myself because I thought to myself, I grew up with that book. That was my childhood book that I had grown up with. I just didn't recognize the name of the book, the actual author. It was a larger book, like wider, but it wasn't thick at all. It was maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 pages tops. And very old school cartoon style. If you've seen it, if you're as old as I am and you were in animation, chances are you probably ran into it. It wasn't anything too substantial, especially compared to something as huge and robust and as thorough as the Animator Survival Kit. But it was a great book. And for nostalgia's sake, I said, screw it. Let's buy it. And I bought it from a store that was literally 8 minutes away from my house by foot. How ironic. But I went on quite the adventure seeking out this information. That said, I was not as successful at seeking information or finding information or getting access to information from people, particularly in a more of a community setting such as a con or the Lightbox Expo or things like that, these very common events that comic book Comic-Cons and stuff like that. That kind of thing didn't really exist to the degree that it did today. So if I was going to get any verbal feedback from a professional, it had to be, in most part, in a school setting, unless you just happened to meet somebody who did exactly the same thing you did. And back in the time when I was studying animation, there were very, very few people, nobody in my immediate entourage who actually studied animation. So I was shit out of luck, period. Now, fast forward to today. And if I reflect back on all of the education and the information that I've received over the years, I can say honestly, with all best intention, that the advice I received was hit and miss. Some people gave me pieces of advice that were valuable that I continue to use to this day. And a lot of advice I got were non-applicable to the type of career that I had. Even when I was studying in animation specifically, I studied at Concordia University, incidentally, where my daughter is studying right now, in the Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema. And although it was a fabulous school, it was a small school, and it was a school that was geared more towards Canadian Film Board animation, National Film Board, more independent artwork style, which was not at all what I wanted to do. I was a focused, sniper-focused Disney artist, commercial artist, as we used to call it. I don't know if it's still called commercial art at this point. And it didn't tickle my fancy so much. It didn't really fulfill that side of it. I learned some fun stuff. I learned how to, set up an Oxbury camera and a Steinbeck machine and how to work a Bolex camera. But none of that applied to what I did. It really didn't. Not at that particular point in time. And at that point in time, anyways, things were starting to shift into digital. So it was fun, nostalgic. I definitely valued the experience, but I couldn't apply that information, that knowledge towards the career I wanted. Sheridan College, incidentally, where Bobby Chu taught in Oakville, Ontario, he taught there for years, was my school of choice. I wanted to go to Sheridan College originally because their animation course was exactly what I was looking for, and they were based in Canada, albeit I found out I was going to be a new daddy, so I decided to stay home. So I stuck with Concordia. It didn't quite do it for me, and that was my reality. Now, if we fast forward to today, to you, and to us, and to our access to this information, we live in a completely different world today than we did back 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, back when I first started my career. The world is not the same place. If I want to know something, if I want to learn something, I can learn it now. I can go on Google, I can learn it now. There are hundreds of videos, there's hundreds of resources, there's affordable schools, there's mentorships, there's tutorials, there's Gumroads, there's vlogs, there's you name it. If I want something, I can get access to anything for free. And I find this an absolute godsend. Being somebody who grew up having to detective himself through his education in a lot of cases, and went through great lengths to get access to information. I am a complete learning addict. It's amazing how quickly I have not only been exposed to, but have really gained some pretty significant knowledge in so many different fields that are by far not my primary area of expertise, which is illustration, concept art, that kind of thing, digital painting predominantly. I mean, I've just spent the last 3 weeks completely doing a makeover of my camera equipment and my monitoring equipment and my sound equipment and my lighting. Oh my God, I've spent so much time. My family's sick and tired. I've been, I'd stay up until like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Not that I advocate for that. I just couldn't sleep because I was busy-minded. But I would get bored, and I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'd just go downstairs and start working on my lighting, and then I would teach a class, and then I would work on my setup, and then I'd teach a class, and then I'd work on my setup. I did this for weeks, and I've watched literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos on all of these different topics. It is so exciting and fun exploring these different things. It's wonderful, and I love the fact that I can do this on my own. I love the fact that I've been able to build a business on my own and run it on my own and administer it on my own and build it and evolve and grow and learn through YouTubing and through teaching. It's awesome, and it makes me very much look forward to the future. It makes me incredibly excited for our future as artists, our future as humans, our abilities to crossbreed skills, to develop and create these new things, how we're bridging the gap between technology and art, evolving to, well, this unpredictable future we have with AI art. I'm not starting a debate there. Trust me. I know it's a controversial topic, but it's exciting. And we're evolving. As human beings, we're evolving, and we're growing at such amazingly fast speeds, but in an exciting way. I don't feel overwhelmed or scared or distraught or depressed about this. I'm excited. This is a world that I love living in, and I love knowing more about the world around me. And I find that that's bringing so much quality into our lives as people, how it's connecting us to other people of so many different walks of life, and helping us to understand each other better and benefit from each other better, professionally and personally. But when does this cross the line? And when can this access do more harm than good? I know this was a very long path to get to this point that I'm making right now, but it's important to understand why we crave information, why we desire seeking information, and when might we be reaching out to perhaps the wrong place. Maybe we're reaching out to the wrong place. And what sparked this whole conversation in the first place was this combined classroom. Chris had made a point about something that made me go, huh. He kind of pushed a topic one little step further beyond what we were talking about and added a nuance to this topic that I felt is really important to elaborate on. And that is, when is that information, when is that advice applicable to your career? And the example that Chris had made was talking about somebody who did, for instance, visual development, viz dev. Visual development by its very nature is the job of exploring style, exploring different genres. I remember when I was working on the Disney show myself, we had a couple of more experienced artists in the team, older guys who were visual development artists that would spend days and days and days researching all of these different little art styles, from comic books to fine art paintings to other animation to illustrators, you name it, anything from many different cultures, trying to channel funnel down, shortlist this art style that could be applied to whatever project they were working on. And at the time, I remember one in particular, they were exploring different visual visual art styles for the remake of Mickey Mouse, which was mega funny. I really liked where they were going with that show. And it was a much darker, grittier side of Mickey Mouse. And they're looking at old comic books and paying attention to how different printing presses would cause ink to be offset, right? So that the color and the line were slightly offset, which was something very iconic of old comic books like Archie comics and stuff that I grew up reading, and Mad magazines and stuff. You'd see that kind of thing all the time. For somebody like that, if I was to turn to them and give them a very common piece of advice that I very often advocate for on my channel, which is finding a direction, picking a direction, channeling yourself into a set direction so that you can develop and evolve and grow a brand, so you can start to create a name for yourself, so that employers know how to identify you in this vast industry, so you don't become a watered down version of a bunch of different things, kind of a jack of all trades but a master of nothing. You don't want to end up in that boat. But that doesn't apply to everybody, does it? That is a narrow scope on this conversation, because somebody who works in visual development would suffer for having a narrow focus, wouldn't they? The whole point of visual development is to diversify, is to explore, is to create interesting recipes out of multiple different styles. Your job is to research and be influenced by as many things as possible, so you can start to build this visual repertoire. I'm not using the word library because it's an overused expression. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but a visual library, a visual repertoire of ideas. So when you sit down and somebody talks about a project with you, you go, I have the solution for you. I have the idea. How about if we explore this? And you can get the ball rolling, because this is something you've been very keenly connected to. You didn't have a linear focus. Growing up as an artist, having too much of a widened scope, looking at life in my career through too much of an ultra wide lens, since I've been talking about camera equipment, was okay. It was definitely beneficial at the beginning of my career, as I was exploring, as I was studying, and maybe in the first couple of years of working as a professional. It was good to keep my scope open to different styles and different possibilities, and test them out and try them out for myself and see what worked, see what stuck. But at a certain point, once I had become more of a seasoned professional, once I became somebody who is considered more senior, it became more and more important, obviously important, that I needed to start making a commitment. It's kind of like, think of your career. It's an analogy I used during the combined classroom with Chris, but it's an analogy I use in everyday life with my students and with myself all the time. Your career is like a relationship. And when you're younger, you might date a little bit and kind of get to know different personalities and expose yourself to good people, bad people, and everything in between. But after experience, you start to understand your tastes. You start to understand what works for you and what doesn't. You start to make a distinction between people that are good for you and people that are harmful for you. Qualities that a person has that you can look past, but the big picture works, and people that don't, and people who can overwhelm you, or people that can control you, or people that can hurt you. And you have to start learning how to make that distinction as a lover of another, so that you can find a healthy, fruitful, mutually beneficial relationship. Same thing applies to a career. You test the waters, you try different things out. Same thing applies to finding a style. You test things out, you try things out. But at a certain point, you're going to realize that certain habits, certain pieces of advice can harm you. And the better you know yourself, we come back to that cringy quote I keep referring to, that I tattooed on my right forearm. Know thyself, right? The more you know yourself, the more you identify with yourself, This is something that takes our entire lives to master. The more you can find your niche, the more you can find your voice and amplify that voice and grow quickly and become recognizable for your skills. And that in turn has a great benefit on your career. Confided, you do what I do, right? Confided, you're an illustrator. Confided, you're a concept artist who works on certain specific genres of films or games or books or something along the likes of that. But maybe not if you're a visual development artist. Maybe you have your niche, you have your particular focus, you have your way of executing things as a visual development artist. Of course, because there are specialties in everything. But diversity is definitely an asset. Another place where being multi-talented, having a good broad range of skills can be very handy is in certain types of film or game studios. When I was working, the same studio that I was working on that worked on the Disney show also worked on stuff for Mattel and worked on stuff for a bunch of different brands. And those projects ranged in styles dramatically from something very quirky and cartoony, the show I predominantly worked on, which was Wander Over Yonder, which my son incidentally fell in love with, so that's pretty cool. And later on, when they got into Hot Wheels and stuff like that, we're going from race cars to quirky cartoons. These are two completely different varying styles. A lot of artists, well, all of the artists that were on my team adapted within 48 hours to these new styles. They picked it up extremely quickly. I can't say that was my forte artistically. I say very often, I managed that setting. I did not thrive in that setting. I never thrived at adapting or conforming to things. Not to mean that I'm antisocial or that I'm impossible to work with. No. But it wasn't that wasn't where the magic came out. And I knew it. And I felt it. And my career was hit and miss very often. Good and bad. I had good times, I had bad times. I had times that I was a complete asset to the company and everybody loved the ground I worked on, and other places where they said, buddy, it ain't working, ciao. And they dropped me off at the curb. This happened many times. But where I really thrived was when I finally decided, after all of those years of trying to say, it's time for me to take a risk. I felt it was a risk at the time, and do my own thing. And, well, my career has never been the same since. I would never look back. And for anybody who relates to me, if you look at artists like me, or Anthony Jones, or Bobby Chiu, or Carlo Ortiz, or Loish, or Istebrak, you look at these artists and you can tell they have really adhered themselves to a specific style. And they've really cultivated and nurtured it and evolved it into something so polished that they're so identifiable through what they do. They're so good at what they do that all you can do is just sit back and in awe and enjoy it as a spectator. That said, there's one last little piece of this puzzle that needs to be mentioned before we close up this week, and that is who you reach out to. And that's kind of the goal of today's video. Listening to students of mine, particularly one who I just had a consultation with just a couple of days ago, who had described to me her experience going to some event, I can't remember what event it was, where she sat down with some professional from some big AAA game studio, showed her portfolio, and that professional gave her advice and said, if you want a career, in quotes, very vague statement, if you want a career, if you want to be successful, you want to stop doing that, you want to do this, you want to have more of this and get rid of that, and otherwise forget about it. And on top of that, just to add insult to injury, said maybe you should pursue a different career because what I'm looking at isn't impressing me. It's too much like this, he said. I'm deliberately trying to be vague because I'm not trying to call anybody out, because I do know specifically who I'm talking about. Somebody who I'm not a big fan of, I'll put it to you that way. And objectively speaking, honestly, genuinely speaking, I looked at her work and I said, if I believed that advice was accurate, albeit not very diplomatic or very kind, if it was accurate, I would let you know where those accuracies lied. But I would let you know that you don't ever deserve to be spoken to like you're a piece of shit. You're somebody who's obviously very, very ambitious and puts a lot of care into what you do, and you are not an amateur by any stretch. And even if you were, show a little bit of class. Don't be a douchebag. But if any of that information was accurate, I would support the good advice. And I would advise her to reject the useless criticisms. But I could say objectively that the artist that she spoke to only saw the world, the career, through one lens, his lens. And it's a very narrow lens. It's a lens that he focused on. It was his ambition. It was his career. And he went for it, and he worked hard at it. He had a very linear focus, and he did it, and he succeeded in doing that. Good for him. But the problem comes up. The problem happens when he starts to say that this is the be-all, end-all way to get a career, because as an artist, there are as many career types as there are artists on this planet. There are no two artists that have exactly the same artistic path. We're not all learning from the same book and doing the same thing. Every one of us are a unique recipe, combination of different types of influences and experiences and personal tastes. I can say this with confidence after speaking to thousands and thousands of artists. Everyone is amazing. Everyone is unique. And everyone needs to be respected. Every person's path needs to be seen. If you want to help somebody, you have to listen to them. And if you don't have the skills, if somebody comes up to me and says, Adam, I want to be a professional comic book artist, what do? I tell them to go and speak to a comic book artist. If somebody comes up and says, I want to do environment art for a living, what do? I said, well, if you want to learn the basic fundamentals, you can take my mentorship. My mentorship focuses more on character-focused illustrations, visual storytelling. If you want environment art exclusively, go talk to my friend Tyler. He's got your back. He's the best of the best that I know. Go talk to him. I don't claim to know everything. I don't know all the rules. I don't know all the tools. I just know it works well for me in the limited time that I've been on this planet. And whenever you speak to somebody, I want you to know, before you go out to these different Comic-Cons and you talk to these different professionals, I want you to know first that if it's your ambition to be a professional artist, if it's your ambition to succeed, you will succeed. You have my word that you will succeed. But if you're reaching out to get advice from people, just generically reaching out to whoever will listen to you for advice and not paying attention to their particular area of expertise, and furthermore, getting that alpha personality come back at you and say, if you want to be like me, you got to do it my way, you're speaking to the wrong person. In fact, I don't think that kind of advice is good for anybody, even somebody who's in that type of career, because it feels very bullyish, to be completely honest with you. It's not helpful advice. It's just somebody using their status to step on your shoulder, to step on your head and make you feel small. And any true, confident professional wouldn't do that. They don't need to. They don't have confidence issues. So my advice to you today is this. If you want to succeed, don't just reach out anywhere for any type of advice. You want to target your advice. You want to think about what kind of skills your particular field demands, and reach out to people that understand that and can help to fuel you with the tools and the advice and the knowledge that you need to grow in your particular field. And if you just so happen to face anybody who makes you feel like crap, it's them, not you. You're under no obligation to be bullied by anybody. All right? With that said, I want to thank you, of course, with all my heart. I love you with all my heart, and happy painting. Take care.